Chapter 17 Grandfather 3 sent an urgent message. Yudhishthir and I were to meet him at the guard tower situated atop the city walls. When we climbed it, we saw a huge army approaching Kampilya. Fear dizzied me. Only 2 weeks had passed since my Swayamvar. Had the unsuccessful suitors returned for revenge? But Yudhishthir said, "Look, there's the banner of Hastinapur. It seems that your uncle has sent an entourage to welcome you home," Dhri said with an ironic smile. "What else can he do, now that he's learned his nephews are alive and well, instead of reduced to ash and crumbled bone, and allied, moreover, to the powerful Drupad?" Yudhishthir said, his smile equally ironic. I was surprised. With his brothers he was always the reasonable one, holding them back, chiding them when they cursed their Kaurava cousins. So he did have his secret darkness, my near-to-perfect husband. But now he was leaning over the edge of the battlement, as delighted as a child at his first fair. "Look, Panchali, grandfather himself has come to fetch us." At the head of the army I saw a man on a white horse, his beard like the rush of a silver river. The sun, reflecting off his armor, was blinding. He dwarfed everyone around him. So this was Bhishma, grandfather to my husbands, the keeper of dreadful woes, the warrior to whose destruction Sikhandi had dedicated his life. Torn between detestation and fascination, I couldn't drag my eyes from him. Yudhishthir glanced at me, his grin proud and boyish. "He does tend to take one's breath away, doesn't he?" As usual, he had read me wrong. Bhishma raised his hand in greeting. He must have recognized Yudhishthir. Even from that distance, I felt his love, heavy and piercing as a javelin. My father received Bhishma respectfully enough, but he didn't mince his words. "Duryodhan almost killed them last time," he said. "Who's to say he won't succeed the next time around? I don't want my only daughter sent back to me in widow's white." He seemed more concerned about losing his new allies than about my marital misfortunes. Bhishma's eyes flashed at the insult, but he only said, "My life for their safety." He spoke with such simple force that even Krishna, whom my father had invited to the meeting, nodded. "Let him go," he said to my father. "With the grandfather to watch over them, Duryodhan won't try anything. Not for a while. Besides, how long can you keep them cloistered? They are heroes after all." When my father and his courtiers left the room, Bhishma embraced Krishna. I hadn't realized they knew each other so well. My ignorance irked me. "Now it begins, Govinda," Bhishma said, calling him by a name I hadn't heard before. How many facets were there to Krishna? I felt, with a kind of despair, that I'd never know them all. The two men looked at each other, somber with a secret they wouldn't share with us. They made us feel like a child. Then Bhishma turned to Yudhishthir, cuffing him on the ear. "Scoundrel," he scolded, "why didn't you let me know that you were alive? When I thought you boys perished in the burning house, it almost killed me." His tone was jocular, but his face showed the depth of his emotion. Deep grooves were etched around his mouth. All of a sudden he looked his age. When he wiped his eyes, I couldn't stop myself from staring. I'd never seen a man, least of all a famous warrior, shed tears. But in the space of a breath he shook off sorrow and took my hands in his. His face filled with genuine gladness. "Dearest granddaughter," he said, "I welcome you with all my heart to your new home." No one had invited me into his life so convincingly. No one had been so eager to find a place for me in his home. All this while, for the sake of Sikhandi, I decided to hate Bhishma. But now I found I couldn't withstand his quicksilver charm. I felt my mistrust melting in the warmth of his smile. Perhaps, I thought, I was finally going where I belonged. The Pandavas returned to Hastinapur in triumph, escorted by marching soldiers and painted elephants and musicians blowing on conches and horns. Kunti and I rode in a chariot resplendent with silk pillows and cloth of gold curtains. Behind us came 100 men carrying chests filled with jewels, my father's parting gift. Kunti had a small, satisfied smile on her face. And why shouldn't she? Her sons were safer and wealthier than they had ever been, with powerful relatives that Duryodhan would hesitate to anger. The whole of Bharat was abuzz with the story of my marriage to 5 brothers, whose filial piety was such that they preferred to share a wife rather than break their mother's word. In our skirmish of wits, too, she had come out ahead, successfully destroying the bond that might have formed between Arjun and me had we only had each other, a bond that might have made him turn, in time, to me instead of her for counsel. I swallowed the bitterness that rose like bile in my mouth. Our war wasn't over yet. I would bide my time observing her, learning her weaknesses. Meanwhile, I would act to perfection my role of daughter-in-law. "What's the palace at Hastinapur like?" I asked in my politest voice. "It's very grand," she said, her voice dismissive. With no one else around, she didn't need to put on a show of pleasantness. "It's probably grander than anything you are used to." Though I suspected Kunti's words, they fired my eagerness to see my new home. I fantasized about a structure that would, in every way, be the opposite of my father's fortress. Airy and effulgent, with windows everywhere and doors opening onto generous balconies. Its walls would be shimmering red sandstone. Its gardens would be a celebration of color and birdsong. Situated on the topmost floor, my rooms would be washed by breezes carrying the distant fragrance of mango blossoms. From a balcony inlaid with marble, I would look out over the entire city and know what was going on, so that when Yudhishthir became king, I could advise him wisely. If Daima, to whom Kunti had taken a dislike, banishing her to the back of the procession with the other servants, had been in the carriage, she would have known right away what I was thinking. She would have clicked her tongue and puffed out her bottom lip, and warned me with one of her favorite sayings. Expectations are like hidden rocks in your path. All they do is trip you up. Nothing could have been more different from my imaginings than the quarters allotted to Yudhishthir and me in Hastinapur. A block of rooms situated squarely in the center of the palace, to keep us safe, Kunti claimed. They looked out onto a courtyard filled with statues of dancing women, frozen in torturous poses. The rooms themselves, though large, made me feel cramped. They were crowded with gaudy draperies, oversized bolsters, two soft carpets that sucked at my ankles, and far more furniture than we had any need for. Intricate artifacts occupied every available surface. A flock of maids were always bustling around, dusting them and gawking at me. It almost made me nostalgic for the stern gloom of my father's court. Once I suggested that the decor might be simplified, but Kunti, whose rooms these must have been when she had arrived at this palace as a young bride, frostily informed me that every item here was sacred, having belonged at one time to King Pandu. Though I felt stifled by my apartments, I was strangely reluctant to leave them. The palace itself was a curiosity, with its bulging gold domes and curliculed mouldings, its doors embossed with beaten metal, its furniture massive enough to accommodate a race of giants. But beneath the gay pomp crouched something ominous and slavering that wished my husband's ill. Now it had turned its attention on me to ascertain if I was the weakest link in the Pandava chain. I felt it approaching, though I could not guess from which direction. It made me long to tunnel underground and hide. I, who had chafed so impatiently to leave the safety of my father's house and plunge into history. But as the newest royal daughter-in-law, I wasn't allowed to hide myself. On state occasions, I had to ride alongside Yudhishthir in his chariot. At these, I discovered, to my surprise, that I was popular. Something about my wedding had caught the public fancy. My appearances were greeted with much cheering, a fact that caused Kunti to teeter between pride and annoyance. There were endless banquets among the extended family. The Kauravas loved to carouse. That I was expected to attend, appropriately veiled and chaperoned, though I had to leave these gatherings along with the other wives before the drinking and gaming started and matters grew interesting. Afternoons, Kunti would drag me with her to visit the other women in the palace. At these gatherings, the women spent much time in casual display of jewelry and clothing, or in making discreet references to their husbands' feats. When I didn't participate, they whispered maliciously about certain people who thought they were better than others because they were married to more than one man. It would have been amusing if I hadn't felt so lonely. I hungered for someone with whom I could have an intelligent and frank conversation. Dhri had accompanied our party to Hastinapur, but as soon as he had met Drona and persuaded him to be his teacher, my father recalled him to Kampilya. It was our first separation, and I missed him dreadfully. His patience, his ability to understand me without words, his unwavering support of me even when he disapproved of my actions. I even missed his exasperation. I missed Krishna too. The way in which his laughter helped lessen the gravity of my problems. I wished he would visit us. Though from Kunti's comments I gathered that here in Hastinapur a wife was not allowed to meet with men except in the company of her husband. I knew I'd find a way to see him in private. Talking to Dhaima would have helped me unburden myself, but Kunti made sure she was kept busy with errands. I couldn't gainsay her without engaging in a fight, and I wasn't ready for that yet. I was desperate enough to have welcomed even Yudhishthir, who had many interesting, if unrealistic, ideas about the world, but he was occupied by his own duties, and I saw him only in the bedchamber. Of the people I'd met since moving here, most blurred into anonymity, but a few stood out. The blind king made a great show, whenever we met, of embracing my husbands and calling loudly on the gods to shower them with good fortune. He blessed me also with such platitudes as, "May you be the mother of 100 sons," or "May your wedding sindoor forever shine on your forehead." We knew, of course, that he'd like nothing better than to have the entire Pandava lineage perish. My other husbands were barely able to tolerate his hypocrisy. Arjun would mutter under his breath, while Bhim's face turned an alarming shade of purple. But Yudhishthir would touch the old man's feet and inquire after his health with genuine affection. Was he a saint, or merely lacking in common sense? In either case it was most annoying. Then there was the blindfolded Gandhari, about whose wifely virtue so many songs had been composed. At first I dismissed her as docile and overly traditional. At the women's gatherings she expressed no opinions. At the family banquets she focused her entire attention on her blind husband's needs. But after a few weeks of watching and asking around, Daima said, "Don't be fooled by her quietness. She is dangerous, with more power than most of us realize, and one of these days she just might decide to use it." She went on to tell me how some god, pleased by Gandhari's devotion to her husband, had granted her a boon. If she ever took off her blindfold and looked at someone, she could heal him or burn him to cinders. I was impressed. I wouldn't have minded a boon like that. It was more useful than the ones I'd been given, and a lot less awkward. "Watch out for her brother, too," Daima warned. "Who? That Sakuni?" I'd seen him in court, sitting among Duryodhan's cronies, a thin, stooped older man with heavily lidded eyes. He had given me a leering grin. I'd gathered from servant gossip that he had a penchant for dice and dancing girls. "You worry too much," I said to Daima. "Someone has to," she said with asperity. "And it certainly isn't your royal oldest husband, who labors under the delusion that all the world loves him." The one man I hadn't seen since I came to Hastinapur was Karna. I knew that at the request of Duryodhan, who considered him his closest friend, Karna spent much of the year in Hastinapur, leaving Ganga in the care of his ministers. I knew also that soon after my Swayamvar, Duryodhan had taken a wife and had urged Karna to do the same. But in this one matter he did not oblige his friend. When I heard my husband's wondering why, I had to exert all my self-control to keep my face calm, my breath even and uncaring. I confess, in spite of the vows I made each day to forget Karna, to be a better wife to the Pandavas, I longed to see him again. Each time I entered a room, I glanced up under my veil. I couldn't stop myself, hoping he was there. It was foolish. If he had been present, surely he'd have turned away. My insult still a fresh gash in his mind. I eavesdropped shamelessly on the maids trying to discover his whereabouts, on the verge of asking Daima to find out where he had disappeared to, for she had her ways of unearthing secrets. I bit back my tongue 100 times. If she had heard me pronounce his name, she would have known how I felt. And even to her, who loved me as she loved no one else, I didn't dare reveal this dark flower that refused to be uprooted from my heart.